Hey friend, Graham here from recordingrevolution.com. Hope you are doing well. Today, let's talk about the mix bus. I'm going to share with you my top 3 favorite mix bus plugins. The mix bus is also called your master fader. It's that final stereo track at the end of your mix that everything runs through. And it's an important part of the mix process. And you may not put any plugins on your mix bus or your master fader. And if so, that's fine. I have found that is one of the best ways to enhance your mix with few plugins, get a lot of bang for your buck. And it's a classic mixing technique. So over the years, I have used a lot of different plugins on my mix bus. And I'm trying to go through some of my go-tos in recent years, the ones that I find I'm always reaching for. And I'm going to share those 3 with you today. Again, disclosure, almost like last week, this is not a sponsored video. I don't do any sponsored videos. So these are just plugins that I own and use, and literally my opinion on what I like to use and what I'm using. So take it for what it's worth. You don't need to use these exact ones. I'll share with you the what behind the plugin so you can use alternatives as well. So here's a song that came out on my most recent EP with Ill Factor. It's called You Don't Know Me. You get a little taste of it, and then I'll show you what the Mixbus plugins are doing and how they really are helping the mix, and I'll show you what settings I'm using. I am about to break. It's getting heavy on my shoulders and I just can't hold the weight. And let's get to a little bit of the hook. You don't know me. I'm heading back where I belong. You don't know me. I'm heading back where I belong. You don't know me. All right, so in this part of the song where everything's in, it's kind of jamming. Let me take a look at the plugins that I've got on the master fader. My mix bus here is the gray track. Everything's going through it. So I color my tracks red for drums, some sort of lightish greenish blue for bass. There's only one guitar, a bunch of synths from Ill, then all my vocals, reverb track, and that's about it. So let's start with taking off the plugins. And to be fair, there's 2 that are actually affecting the sound, and then 1 that is actually a meter that I use, and it has become a go-to plugin for me. So I'll show you that as well, but only 2 are actually going to affect the sound. So I will bypass these 2. You can hear the difference that it's making, and then I'll dive into the individual plugins and their settings. Massive difference, right? The song comes alive. It gets more bright, more forward, more energy. You hear average loudness coming up. We'll talk about loudness in a minute, but it is much better. There's a big bang for your buck with just 2 plugins. So what are we doing here? Let's take away one. The first one is the Mix Centrex. It's Greg Wells Mix Centric from Waves. This plugin is magical, and I've been using it for a solid 2, maybe 3 years since it was first debuted at the NAMM show. I saw Greg Wells literally debut it on the NAMM floor, and it's hard to hear a plugin on a conference floor with hundreds of thousands of people blasting guitars and drums right next to you. It's like being in, Guitar Center, but worse. And so it made a difference. Even on the show floor, I could notice a difference, but I was questioning it. So I went back and demoed the plugin when I got home, and I was like, dude, this thing is magic, and I bought it. And I've been talking about it for years. What it is, it looks like 1 knob, but it's really 3 effects under the hood. It is an EQ, it is a harmonic exciter slash saturation plugin, and it's also compression. And all you do is dial it up or down. And you have an output knob as well. Dial it up or down. And it's not just more linearly of all 3 effects. The aggressiveness of the curve of all 3 intensifies as you crank it up. So it actually changes the character. So just to give you a heads up, this is the most I ever turn the knob, is halfway up, to 12 o'clock position. Generally, I start at the 9 o'clock position here on the left, and then I go anywhere between 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock. Anywhere past that, and this plugin can just destroy a mix and make it too crispy. It also makes the mix louder, so you have to pull down the output fader to make sure it's not making it louder. Take a listen to what this plugin is doing by itself before, and then we'll turn it on. So this plugin creates some wideness and width because it affects the edges of the mix differently than the middle, I feel. Anecdotally, I feel like if you have guitars on the left and the right, if you have synths on the left and the right, this plugin adds some harmonics to them in a very musical way that brings them out and almost creates the illusion of width. It brings vocals and drums forward in the mix. It's perfect for anything with vocals or drums and I put this on before I mix the song, by the way. I mix through these plugins, okay? I mix through them. And so these effects are added at the beginning before I've even tweaked the vocals or drums, but it brings the vocals and the drums forward in the mix. So it's perfect for a lot of modern music. It really does do the musical things you want it to do. It increases the excitement as well. And so I tend to crank that up till it feels like it's making a difference the way I like to hear it. And then I pull the output volume down so it better matches the input volume. Love Greg Wells' Mixcentric from Waves. You just got to demo it and just see what it does in your mixes. It's crazy. Second to that is an oldie but a goodie, and it's Steven Slate's FGX. Now, this is an old Slate digital plugin, and this is like classic Fabrice Gabriel genius under the hood. It's really two plugins, a compressor, and then don't call it a limiter. He calls it FG level, but it functions functionally like a limiter. But you don't have to use it as a limiter. So I don't use it as a compressor, generally speaking, because I'm already getting good compression from something else. And I don't use it as a limiter either. I can for quick, masters or something like that. But what I use it for is a Transient Designer and sort of a magic energy box. Okay, there are three knobs that are very interesting to me. I do have the gain turned up because I was using it for a quick master when I was sending it back and forth with ill, but there's a button called constant gain monitoring. So no matter what the gain is, it kind of like reduces the gain back to what it was. It keeps the level the same. These three knobs, low punch, detail, and dynamic perception, are magic. These knobs were really designed to, when you limit something, it's the way you make it louder. The way you make it louder is by reducing the dynamics. It's the only way to make something truly louder because you have to increase the average volume, so you have to reduce the dynamic range. So these knobs were introduced to recreate the sense of dynamics after the fact to breathe life back into a mix that's been crushed. So you can have the best of both worlds, loudness and like dynamics and the energy and all that good stuff. I just use it for those magical transient designers. So the low punch creates like a good, nice thump on the kick drum, and the detail creates a lot of smack on the snare. And then the dynamic perception just creates energy. I kind of crank them almost to 12 o'clock max, and I see what they do. So let me play a little bit of the mix with this off, and then I'll turn FGX on. Really, you hear the pump and the energy in the drums come into life. That's what low punch and detail are doing and the dynamic perception knob are doing. It's a phenomenal plugin, and the ITP slider allows you to even tweak it one step further by saying what kind of music, what kind of transients. Are these hard transients like like aggressive metal or metalcore or rock, or is it something smooth like a chill ballad? You can adjust the way this plugin attacks transients and interacts with transients by being harder on them for aggressive music or smoother. So between those four knobs, you get a lot of detail that you can control and a lot of possibilities with the sound. Now let's go back to the two plugins again, because some of you might be saying, oh, it's getting louder, but yes and no. Peak volume is staying the same. Average volume is going up, and that's because of the compression that's happening, right? That's because of the compression primarily on the Mixcentric plugin. But yes, I set the outputs of each of these so that the peak volume stays about the same. So take a look at, I think it's peaking around -5 before any of the plugins. Let's take a look. Right, so it's peaking at about -5. Turn on the plugins. Perfectly peaking at -5. But the average volume has gotten louder. So peak volume stays the same. I'm not losing any headroom, but the average volume, which we perceive as excitement and energy, has increased. Those two plugins are doing phenomenal work for my mix. Third and final plugin doesn't actually affect the sound of it, but I want you to see this because this is so helpful and I use it all the time. It is Tonal Balance Control, which comes as part of the iZotope Ozone Advanced package. And Ozone is a super dope plugin in and of itself, but I actually, over the last couple of years, have only been using the Tonal Balance Control plugin from that Ozone bundle. And what it is like another set of ears for you visually. I don't usually rely on a lot of metering, but this has been the one meter visually that I feel like is helpful for me. What it does is it gives you two main looks at the frequency range of your whole mix. You've got the lows, the low mids, the high mids, and the highs. They break it into 4 sections, right? And then there's ranges of where your music should fall based on them and analyzing music in 3 types of genres. Modern, which I know is broad, but modern would include pretty much everything you're working on. Rock, pop, country, hip hop, any of that stuff, right? Then there's bass heavy, which you could switch to if you feel like with hip hop, you're going to have more low end and it's going to be more bass heavy. They've analyzed that kind of music. And then there's orchestral, which looks very different, right? And you can see the recommended ranges, top and bottom lines, these colored areas of the ranges of where these little white lines should be dancing to tell if your overall mix is tonally balanced across the whole spectrum for what actual final masters and mixes look like. And if this isn't good enough for you, you can analyze your own song or your own mix. If there's a reference track that you're trying to perfectly mimic, or an album from an artist that you want to mimic the tonal, you can literally create a new target based off of that album or that song, and it'll show it visually. It'll analyze it in seconds, and then you can check that your sort of tones based off of that. It also looks at your low end, your crest factor. How dynamic is your crest factor? If the little knob is over here, your low end or bass is super dynamic, which could be good or bad. If it's over here, it's super crushed and compressed. And so you ideally want to have your low end somewhere in the middle where it's a little tamed, but not completely squashed. And so what I want to show you is how you can tell if your mix is balanced tonally, even if your speakers are lying to you. Let's press play and watch the white lines dance. Let's watch them dance. Right, let me get to back where there's some more vocals. You don't know me. I'm heading back where I belong. You don't know me. I'm heading back where I belong. You don't know me. So I can instantly look at this and say, yep, my mix is balanced. I'm in the sweet spot. I'm in the range. My crest factor is good. I'm not overly bright or overly bass heavy or not enough bass or too much low mids. I'm in a safe range. And then if you want to get more specific, there is a fine view. You don't know me. I'm heading back where I belong. You don't know me. I'm heading back where I belong. You don't know me. So you can see more specifically which frequencies are peaking or dipping. And so you can see like I've pulled out a lot of around 300 or so, and that's probably what's bringing my low mids down where the rest of the low mids are perfectly fine. So you could really gain a lot of insight into your balance of your faders and your EQ and compression decisions to know if you're creating a balanced mix, which will help translation. It'll help your mixes, no pun intended, translate out into the real world, and you have another advocate for you visually. This has been the most helpful meter I've ever used because it's real world to me. It actually gives me real world data. So I slap this guy on at the beginning of my mix, and I balance my faders, and I look at it at the beginning of my mix. And then I check it throughout the mix, and I check it at the end of the mix. So it is on my master fader all the time. It's on my mix bus all the time, but I'm using it to make sure I'm making correct decisions with my mix. So there you go. I've got the Mix Centric from Greg Wells. I've got the Slate Digital FGX, and then Tonal Balance Control. Real quick, if you don't use these plugins, what are we looking for here, right? What are we looking for? We're looking for what these plugins are doing. And they're doing some harmonic saturation, which I think goes a long way to bringing some life to your mix. Compression on the mix bus goes a long way to creating energy because you got to reduce dynamics even just a little bit. So having a compressor on your mix bus, doing some gentle compression is worth it. And then having some transient designer type stuff can really bring out the energy. And then having some kind of meter to tell you where is your frequency range. Like mathematically, where is your mix in comparison to a reference track visually in case your speakers aren't giving you what you need? That's basically what's going on underneath these plugins for me. Now, two things before you go. One, let me know below with a comment. Do you use any one of these three plugins? Yes or no? And then two, what are your favorite go-to mix bus plugins right now? What do you find yourself, because I'm sure you've used a lot, what do you find yourself grabbing most consistently from mix to mix in the last 12 months? Leave a comment below. And two, you're a mixer, you want to get better at mixing. If you need help, what you probably need is a systematic approach to mixing, because we can look at plugins all day, but until you have a system of what to do first, second, or third, you will wander through the mix process. I'm big about systems, and so I have an 8-step system, an 8-step process to mixing that I follow pretty religiously on every mix. I do this first, and this second, this third, all the way through the 8th step. And I want to give you my mixing checklist. It's all 8 steps in a simple checklist that you can follow with some tips and strategies behind each step. I want you to download that and use it as a reference point for yourself to know how to mix and not wander through the mix. And I also want to give you a bunch of multi-tracks or a song of multi-tracks that you can mix, some stems that you can download right now and practice. Whether you want to work on your mix bus or you want to follow the 8-step process, you can practice on those tracks as well. I want to give you those multi-tracks free along with the 8-step mixing checklist as my gift to you for watching these videos. Just go to mixingchecklist.com, grab your download there, and then practice putting these 8 steps into place. And maybe for today, you can work on your mix bus settings and figure out which plugins you like to use on the mix bus. Okay, I'll put that link in the description below. It's also here on the screen. That's mixingchecklist.com. I hope you are staying healthy, staying safe. I'll see you on another video real soon.